Jade and welcome to this Q&A video. So as often as I can, I answer the questions that you leave for me in the comments in all the different videos I do as a guest contributor for this channel. There are so many interesting questions today. This is going to take a lot of brain work for me. I am just a person who has achieved OCD recovery by working with the business behind this channel, OCD Recovery. And all I can do is share my experiences with you as a person who's been where you are, felt the things you feel. And so if you do have a question that you would like me to talk about in the next video, just comment below. Make sure that you like the video too and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future ones. Yeah, there are so many to get through. So thank you to everyone for submitting the brilliant questions. I think that even if you didn't submit a question, this is going to be a really valuable watch for you because they're such common ones, and every single one of the questions today I have personal experience with and have been through. So this just goes to show how we're all in it together. We've all got all the same feelings and experiences. So I'm just going to jump into the first question, which comes from Pamela. Pamela says, and this was in response to my video, is it possible to recover from OCD? Pamela says, can you define recovery? In my experience, OCD is a chemical imbalance that doesn't just go away. It can get better with treatment. It can be exacerbated by certain things, but I don't believe it's curable. 100%. So in my video, I talked about the fact that OCD, to my knowledge, is not currently curable, but I was happy with the idea that recovery for me has meant the absence of constant chronic guilt, where intrusive thoughts don't feel so intrusive, that I still get them, but in the same way that a person without OCD gets them, they don't cause huge amounts of distress. The reason that I agree with Pamela that there isn't a cure for OCD is that I still recognise from time to time that my brain is a brain that has OCD, which essentially, if you want to talk about science, and obviously my knowledge on science is very limited, I'm just a person who's had OCD, has OCD. My understanding is that my amygdala gland at the front of my brain misfires and creates a fear threat response when it doesn't need to. And so I just think of it as I'm just super scared of stuff. Just keep it really simple. I'm super scared of things at times. And so for me, recovery was about learning not to be scared of things anymore. And that's where unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional life acceptance, and all of the other recognized tools such as exposures, mindfulness, distancing myself from the thoughts, all of those with the unconditional self and life acceptance and becoming more rational, which is a lot of what we talk about on this channel, has been the ticket for me for recovery. If you're new to this channel and you don't know much about unconditional self and life acceptance as an additional tool to getting better, I really recommend that you scroll through the channel and find some videos about that topic. I've definitely done one myself on unconditional self and life acceptance, and also things about my recovery plan. That's a really good video too. So Pamela, yeah, 100% agree with you there. In terms of chemical imbalance, I don't know much about this, but my understanding is that when we view it like this, for me, when I viewed it like this, it felt like something that meant that I couldn't get past it. And so essentially, I guess like anything that we go through in our brains could be chemical imbalances, which I understand is where medication can be really helpful for people while they're recovering as well. So yeah, my knowledge is limited on that. Okay, hey Steffi, it's nice to see your comments all the time on the videos. I'm really glad that you find them valuable. Steffi says, I don't know how the irrational beliefs and fears work with harm OCD. How do you break down the fears related to harm and become comfortable with them? Okay, the first thing to say here is that the goal is not to become comfortable with fears. We're actually working to have the same type of response to these fears as someone without OCD would have. That is something I've always found so useful in my recovery journey. I was so stuck for so long thinking, okay, if the work is to accept the worst case scenario, how can I possibly get to a place where I wouldn't mind that happening? Acceptance isn't agreement. Acceptance isn't going, oh yeah, it's fine if it happens, no problem, no worries. You would still definitely not want it to happen. we're aiming to respond in the same way that a friend of ours, think of a friend of yours. If you spoke to a friend and said, hey, how would you feel if you hurt someone really badly and had to go to prison for the rest of their life, your life, they wouldn't spiral into a panic attack and obsess over it for 3 days and avoid situations that could eventually lead them to commit these crimes. They'd say, oh, I really wouldn't want that. That would be horrible. And then they would move on with their day. That's what we're aiming for. We're not aiming for being comfortable with the idea of being in prison for a really long time. However, what we are doing is making peace that sometimes society makes things seem way worse than they are. So even if you did have to spend some time in prison, you could read loads of books, you could write a novel, you could, become better and then help people who were also, criminals or had done something wrong. So it's just about also seeing that sometimes what we fear is not actually as horrendous as we imagine. And often a lot of people have lived our fear and been there. I do understand though, I found, because I've had lots of different OCD fears, and I did find that like harm and POCD were the trickiest ones from the unconditional self and life acceptance. And I often give the example of like, I suffered with ROCD and at times health OCD, just in the context of like, I'd be terrified of getting sick from food. So it didn't latch that hard, but I always use it as an example because unconditional self and life acceptance helped those fears release quite well, because I could quite easily see, well, many people live their whole life in an unhappy marriage and it wasn't necessarily terrifying to me. So that started to really unlatch for me. Same with getting unwell. It's like, okay, so I go to hospital, I'm on a drip for a few days, possibly even die from food poisoning. I'm not that scared of those things. So it really helped me to see rationally. But I can completely relate with you, Steffi, that when it comes to harm, it's like, how can I accept myself as this monster that I don't want to be? And it's really hard to go down the road of like, why you feel that way without giving any reassurance, because can be so terrifying to think of being something that we desperately don't want to be. I think all you can do is keep doing the work. Chapter 4 of the Myth of Self-Esteem, if you haven't already read the Myth of Self-Esteem, the Albert Ellis book, is like such a revolutionary chapter for this type of thing. It really helps you to understand that often the things that we fear are not as bad as we imagine. But yeah, I think it's a really difficult one as well. Like, the biggest thing for me was detaching people from their actions. And this is not like crazy off the wall stuff. There are a lot of psychologists in the world who do TED Talks about this, talking about the fact that, the criminal system, the fact that if someone commits a bad act, it can be for a number of factors, genetics, lived experiences, and actually how we help those people to become better and to be able to integrate with society well is really important for how we, look at these issues differently. I think our media makes out that, it's like these monsters exist, when actually, when you really look into psychology and how it all works, I think Albert Ellis even says, like, no one commits horrendous crimes who's mentally well. There's something going on there every time. So absolutely, we don't accept these behaviours and these actions. They can be really terrible. But at the same time, learning to have a more rational view on actions and behaviours versus someone's fundamental worth, and them not being a bad person, just a person who's, for whatever reason, committed a really bad act, can help you just to turn that fear down so that you can start to think about things in the same way that someone without OCD would. But I really recognize this was the hardest part of my journey, the biggest part, and I think it is worth the work. Okay, Charlie says, oh wow, this is a great explanation of unconditional unconditional acceptance. I was talking about acceptance. He says, he or she, sorry Charlie, I kept getting it confused with thought and feeling neutralization and rationalizing my fears down to a pulp, and it was perpetuating my fear of fear. It's great to think of it as, yes, I don't want it and I don't have to like it at all, but I could handle it and it wouldn't be the end of the world. It's kind of hard to put into practice when OCD is latching to real life issues, but it's helping me learn life acceptance. Being willing to experience anything kind of then allows you to refocus on the things that you want clearly and creating goals for them without a crippling fear. Thank you. This helped me so much this morning, just being able to clearly define my plan for recovery, an aha moment. So that's not a question, but I wanted to share Charlie's comment because it was really interesting to see how they had really had an aha moment. And this is something I really resonated with because that happened for me several times during getting better from OCD and learning about unconditional acceptance. It was like, oh, it's not that. And yeah, this is a point I want to make. If you are currently practicing unconditional acceptance alongside anything like your exposures, leaving the thoughts alone and stopping ruminating, stopping avoidance, I want you to be really careful that you're not using it like in the moment of being triggered. This definitely isn't what it is. So, for example, let me give an example of what we don't want to be doing. Okay, I've had a terrifying thought. I've just seen a knife and a person I love is nearby. Oh my gosh, intrusive thought. What if I do this? What if this happens? What if I lose control? What if something awful happens? What if I'm actually a psychopath and I have no emotion and I don't even care because the thought of acting on this urge doesn't bother me, it doesn't terrify me anymore. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? You wouldn't at that point neutralize it by saying to yourself, yes, but even if I did do that, then okay, there's something wrong with me and I would go to prison, and then in prison I would be okay. That is essentially, that is a compulsion. What we're talking about is when we're not triggered, treating this as a piece of work to fundamentally shift our belief system and become more rational in how we view things overall. So, for example, on an OCD recovery plan, you might be spending 20 minutes a day when you're really new to all of this, disputing what your core irrational beliefs are, such as if I commit a horrible act, then I'm written off by society and my whole family wouldn't speak to me and I'd have to go to prison and I could be beaten up and the conditions would be awful and my life would never be the same. It wouldn't be worth living. So I might as well die. You would write down that sort of like irrational belief, define what the core fear is, which could often be societal rejection, and then you would work on making peace with, okay, why would that be, the worst thing that's ever happened? Can you find examples of where that has happened to people and it wasn't so bad? So again, I'm not that great at explaining exactly how it would work without getting the actual books out, but yeah, all of the work, the exercises are spelled out when you work with one of the OCD recovery coaches like I did. I'm not a coach, I'm just a guest contributor, so they can really explain to you how to do that. And that is done in isolation of being triggered. You don't do that to feel better, because that's when it goes into compulsive territory. What should then happen is that your brain automatically has those beliefs and then the fears don't latch, they sort of slide off. And a great example of this is how to think about something you're not at all afraid of and think about how it could possibly latch for you. Well, it wouldn't, because you're not afraid of it. So even something really, really bad. So let's say you're not scared of getting unwell, and I say, well, what if you had a lump somewhere in your body that could possibly be cancer? If you're not in any way scared of that from an OCD perspective, you might just think, oh, I think I'll get that checked out of the doctor, but you wouldn't really think about it beyond that. And that's actually how loads of people in life, when you hear, especially with like older people, they'd be like, oh, he never wants to go to the doctors, he's terrible, he just thinks, he shrugs everything off, and then years later they find out they've had this, awful illness going on they didn't look into and should have. And so it's just really interesting that like our fears make us believe that things are rational that we're doing when in fact they're not. Alet says, I still feel very confused by everything, how everything fits into my theme, and sometimes seeing a therapist who uses ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, I don't feel as if accepting the thoughts and distancing myself from them, plus using mindfulness and bringing the anxiety down. At the same time, I don't know how disputing irrational beliefs and practicing unconditional self-acceptance will bring the fear down either. I've had a terrible year after my OCD returned. First of all, I'm really sorry that you've had a terrible year, Alet. We've all been there and it can be really challenging. Let's hope that 2023 is going to be a lot better for you. So I can entirely relate to this. I also had similar therapy before I worked with OCD Recovery, who run this channel, and it took me some way. It took me a really good way forward, in that I suffered from OCD for 17 years, really badly, and I didn't actually know I had it until 4 years ago. So when I did find out I had it and had things like ACT with CBT, did exposures, distance from the thoughts, there were also some unhelpful therapies that I tried where it was like not understood that it was OCD. So it was like talking therapy and going into the thoughts in too much detail, and really sort of reassuring myself that I wasn't a bad person. All this stuff was really unhelpful. So I really get where you are. And it also feels like quite a scary thing to jump into the fire with unconditional acceptance and rational thinking, because it's like, how can this possibly work for me? So I think really all I can suggest that you do is just keep learning, because I don't think anyone should ever take on a therapy before really understanding in which ways it's going to help them and figuring out for themselves that this is definitely going to work for me. I made it my mission when I was really bad in 2018 to like research, read loads of different things about OCD so that I could make my own mind up. I don't mean this in a compulsive way, but what I did was I wanted to educate myself so that when I met a therapist, everything they told me, I could say, but what about this? How do you handle that element of OCD? And when they didn't know what that was, I could quickly be aware that this is not a person who really understands OCD very well. I think this is a sad reality for OCD sufferers, that there are not many specialists out there who really understand OCD. There are a lot of people who are really good with OCD, but there are a lot of local therapists who are more generalist therapists who don't quite understand OCD. I genuinely think there's probably only a handful of people in the world who are really good at treating OCD, like in the context of how many hundreds of therapists you could find even in one area. So to find one local that would work is, yeah, really challenging. That's just based on my experience. You know, you can be lucky to find someone who's really, really great. But sometimes it's not even the therapies, it's their lack of understanding of how the grip of OCD can be so unbelievably locked in. You know, this idea of distancing yourself from the thoughts, this really does work. Like when you've got a theme that's not latching too hard. Like I have lots of themes and have had lots of themes in the past where they haven't latched that hard, and genuinely just not going there, not getting myself engaged with the thoughts and leaving it alone has done wonders. So it's not that this is wrong, it's just that it may not be helpful as much as we want it to for people with quite severe OCD, which is what I had. So in terms of getting comfortable, Alec, with how unconditional acceptance and rational thinking could work for you, I really recommend, if you haven't already, reading the reading list as recommended by this channel. So if you go to ocdrecovery.com, there's a section under resources, I think, called reading list, and just start to read through those, because that is the best way to do it. Because Albert Ellis is the guy who came up with REBT, which is rational emotive behavior therapy, and he can describe the concept of these two things in much better detail than I could on here. But in the most basic of ways that I can describe it to you is that I think that what was missing from me getting better from OCD was that no one had ever addressed the fact that I was just really scared of things. And it just seems so basic, doesn't it? Like, you've got this thing in your brain that fires off a fear threat response. Why are we not talking about how to be less fearful of things? Why are we only talking about like, oh, they're just thoughts, get in front of the thoughts more? Now, really, when you think of exposures, that is an attempt to stop being scared of something. But when the beliefs are held so rigidly, same for me. For example, right now, I hold a belief that I feel is quite rational. That if I were to be dangled over a cliff with just a piece of rope that I'm holding on to with nothing other than I'm holding on to it, it's very likely that I'm going to fall to my death. So there's no amount of times that you could get me to do that or I wouldn't feel terrified of dying, because it's rational and it's very likely that I would die from that. And so really, if you think of the exposure as hanging by a rope, these therapists who perhaps with more severe cases of OCD like I had are missing the fact that I am extremely terrified and feel that it's very likely that something bad's going to happen. Now, I get it that they say, well, yeah, but the more you do it and see that something bad doesn't happen, then it's going to unlatch. But that didn't for me, because I just thought, oh, well, I'm just controlling myself. I'm suppressing all these thoughts and urges. And that's the only reason that it's not, something bad's not happening. So really just think of, you know, disputing irrational beliefs and unconditional acceptance as a way to not be as scared of things and have a rational view on them. I also found it helpful to think of like, my brain has got irrational fears And people without OCD, their fears are usually more rational. That's why when we say, oh, I don't want to eat in that restaurant because I'm scared we'll all get sick, our family members could be like, what, are you crazy? What are you talking about? That's so irrational. We're disputing our irrational beliefs. They are irrational. You can't really argue with it. Like, it's very irrational for us to be terrified of the things that people don't even notice. And that really helped me as well. So I hope that's useful, Alet. Loni says, I know that stopping the contact. Okay, actually, I'm going to go backwards and read the whole thing. Loni says, hey Jade, I love it when you mention that we are much stronger than we think we are, because most of the times I don't realise I lost most of my childhood and youth due to OCD suffering. I know that stopping the catastrophizing is part of the journey. So when I'm trying to admit myself or to others that I've been through a lot, the guilt comes up because there's always someone who's had it harder than me. It feels like I'm being hard on myself and I should not feel that I experience very hard times. What advice would you give? Okay, I relate so much to this because my childhood was so, like, my childhood was just not fun for so many reasons, OCD being part of it. And so yeah, it can be difficult. There's a bit of a taboo because essentially our suffering was invisible. So I really get where you're coming from, is that kind of like old school view of like, oh yeah, but you know, you look at you lived in a lovely house, or you know, you had all your family with you, or whatever it is that you've got going for you that's leading you to feel guilty. So the first thing I would say is, well, A, why do we need to compare? It doesn't matter what other people have experienced in the past. B, guilt is not a helpful emotion. There's nothing, it doesn't bring you anything. And yeah, of course, if you're going around to people who've just left a war zone telling them that, you know, you've had difficulty with mental health in the past, when they're probably not in a position where they want to hear about someone else's suffering in comparison to their own, of course, like I would keep my mouth shut in those instances, like myself. But also, you know, I don't think that we sometimes recognise just how difficult OCD suffering is. Like it didn't the World Health Organization put it down as like one of the top 10 most debilitating illnesses that you can have. So I think we do need to just recognise that we're warriors, we've been through a lot to have had this disorder. But also I would say that my main piece of advice with you would be to kind of leave this conversation alone in your mind the best you can. See the guilt come up for you and recognize it, acknowledge it, and decide to let it be there. And this is where like the whole rational thinking journey helped me so much. It's like, say there's a disagreement in my family, I immediately go to, well, why does my family life need to be perfect? Where is the rule that everything in life needs to be exactly as I want it to be? And there's this softness that comes in life from that. There's this feeling of peace in daily situations. So this idea that you're facing, this guilt that you're feeling, this essentially is a life situation, isn't it? It's not an OCD suffering thing. This is like a real life issue that you're facing. So yeah, why should you not feel guilty? Why is it so bad to feel guilty? Why do you need it to be worse than other people's for you to feel upset about it? Also, why does childhood need to be great? You know, loads of people have difficult childhoods. Actually, the fact that my childhood was so difficult, I'm grateful for today, because it's really deepened my experience of being a parent. So the experience my children are having, like, I feel so grateful for the feelings I felt as a child. And for example, if one of my kids one day has OCD, how brilliant in terms of like how I'll be able to support them given the journey I've been on. So if I hadn't had OCD and then they got it, like maybe I wouldn't know what to do about it. So I hope that helps, Loni. Something here from Matthew. So Matthew, we've been chatting back and forth on these Q&As quite a bit, so really cool to chat to you. So Matthew, you've left quite a long comment, which is fine, gives me some background, but I'm just going to read the ultimate question, which is, so I can see here that your fear is of like losing everything, of like all your loved ones in your life. So you say, I suppose if you relapsed tomorrow, how could you comprehend that your fears might possibly be true after having seen yourself as the parent and person you are now that you're in recovery? Unless your entire personality changed, I can't see how you could comprehend it. This is a heck of a question, Matthew. This is so big. So I get this, right? Because now that I'm well, every now and then, my fear is more, I don't want this life taken away from me. I'm so happy, or I've been so happy. How can I go to a place, it's usually fear of OCD coming back in again. But I guess this is just the same as all of it, isn't it? Like you're still scared of something happening. And so I guess the work is on making peace with those things. Now, your fear seems to be of losing everything. Your fear is like ultimate rejection, just losing all your loved ones, like missing your life as it is now. Um, and I think that probably based on what you've said in this thing, your brain is going on a bit of a rabbit hole, spiraling like fest. And I would recommend that you like step out of that, because again, we're not looking to be happy with these scenarios. We're not looking to go, oh, I'd be fine. Yeah, I'd be absolutely fine. This would be great. It's much more about saying, you know, in the most extreme conditions of suffering in life, I could survive it. I would definitely wouldn't want to go there. But I think what's happening is your brain is kind of like testing you for like, yeah, but what about this? What about that? So as you're starting to make strides towards feeling better, it's like, yeah, but what if the absolute worst thing you could ever possibly imagine ever happening to you? And it's almost like OCD is like baiting you to be like, yeah, but what about this? What about this, Matthew? So I would suggest like just, again, I've said in the past that things like distancing yourself from thoughts can be really useful at times of spiraling. Like when I've had ROCD spirals in the past, and the advice from my life coaches has been like, so like Rob, who I work with, will say just like exit the conversation, like leave it alone. And it genuinely does just like settle a little bit. So I would say with these spiraling rabbit hole type conversations of like, what if this and this and this and this and this and this, you need to identify what is the core thing. Like from my experience, you need to identify what's the core thing here that's driving all of this and work on that, rather than trying to say, how could I possibly comprehend getting better? And then everything turned out to be true. It's just like, yeah, it's probably taking you down that rabbit hole. But let's answer your question directly. So I'm now happy with the parent and person I am. And the reason that I'm happy as the parent and person I am is that I have made peace with a lot of the worst case scenarios. So it's exactly the same. It's like, unless your entire personality, how could you comprehend it? It's not really about comprehending it. It's just that I'm not really worrying about it as much anymore because I'm not scared of it anymore. So I guess some part of you is probably still really scared of all this stuff. And again, I'm not, you say, how could you comprehend that your fears might possibly be true? It's like there's no comprehension. It's like there's the recognition that even if it's 0.0001% that a fear could be true, it's the recognition that, well, I couldn't control that anyway, and I'm not going to spend my time worrying about and assessing it. I'm not thinking about it anymore. And I think that's what recovery is. So I think as you move forward in recovery, from my experience, that is what will happen for you. You won't start asking those questions as much. And I think this stage you're going through is a very normal part of it, and something I definitely went through. Okay, this is a snappy name. SS 2011. That sounds like a fashion line, spring summer 2011. Okay, so SS 2011. Hi Jade, my main issue is with harm OCD, which of course has been centered around the most important thing in my life, my child. My questions are, did you have urges related to your OCD theme? And how did you handle them in the moment when they feel so real? I'm not avoiding anymore. I stay put when I feel them, but I really just don't want to hug him in that moment. I'm starting to dispute my core beliefs, and my anxiety is so much better. This is keeping me in that fear cycle. Yeah, so with urges, I just treat them the same way as thoughts, as anything else. Let them be there, let them do their thing, keep doing your work, and absolutely the right thing you're doing is not avoiding. So there were many times when my first child was little, when everything in my brain would be screaming like, don't go near them, don't cuddle them, don't have them sleep in the same room as you, don't bath them, don't change them. But part of the journey was like, for example, if I went through a phase of like not wanting to bath my child, my homework would be bath them every single day for 2 weeks, which sounds weird because I bath my kids every day now. They're just so filthy after a busy day that we have to, and I enjoy that time of day. But it was like when I was only wanting to bath them like once a day and just doing like wet wiping in between, once a week, sorry, like to me doing it every day was like, okay, my life will be like absolute living hell every single day now, because it would be a day and a half of terror on bath day. So yeah, it's like genuinely, as long as you're working on the overall recovery plan that you have in place, you do need to treat these urges the same. So yeah, like jump into the fire was a brilliant piece of advice I was given once, like go for it all in. And just know that you're not alone. I felt so many of these things, and I know that so many of my friends I've made on the OCD recovery journey, particularly a group of mums that I know, like we've all been there, and it's really scary at the moment. And just give yourself the space to like rest as well when you can, because actually I think sometimes when you've got a child, like you're just so exhausted that everything can feel so much worse as well. But keep going with your overall recovery, because that's what's going to help the urges go. When you don't care if they're there or not, that's when they leave you. Okay, we've got a couple more. SC says, I had a real event where I kissed somebody else in a moment of madness, and it sparked all of my ROCD fears. My partner didn't care and brushed it off, but I want to know how you manage the two themes together when there has been infidelity, conflict, or trust issues in a relationship. This is really freaky, because like I've had a very, very similar experience in my life where it was like, hang on a minute, this is no longer just ROCD, this is actually real now. And so it feels like it's proof. Whereas actually, I think once you recognize that like relationships aren't actually perfect, but because of your ROCD, you're wanting them to be, and you're wanting yourself to be a perfect partner, as soon as there's some kind of mistake in any area of where OCD latches, you feel like it's proof. And so I think unconditional self and life acceptance really helps here. Like maybe the fear is, okay, so if I kissed somebody else, does that mean I don't actually want to be with my partner? And I think for mine, this happened actually as a result of our OCD, because it was almost like testing myself of like, oh, what would happen if, and then went ahead with the act, and then it was like almost like a test of like, oh wow, it is all true. And that can be really scary, because you're like, oh my gosh, I acted on the fear, which means it's all real. So how did I overcome this? Let me try and remember. So I made peace with my ultimate fear within our OCD, which was that I'm with the wrong person. Like that was what my fear would latch to. It would give me all sorts of evidence as to why I was with the wrong person. And I had to really just dispute those irrational beliefs, i.e., why is it scary to settle down with the wrong person? You can still live a happy life. A relationship is not everything in the whole world. And so that really helped. And I just have to say as well, like, in a real life sense, it's a big journey to go on when there's been infidelity in a relationship. So that's probably where you're struggling as well. I'm like you, I don't see it as a small thing. And it's really great that your partner brushed it off, but it is really traumatizing for the person, I think. So like, people often talk about, oh, I was cheated on, as how hard that was. But I think actually being the person who commits infidelity is really damaging to that person, because they're the one who is not, um, they're the person, I guess, who has done something that they, that isn't true to them, essentially. If it's not, I mean, there are a lot of people who are in relationships who are open, and that's cool, obviously, if both parties are happy with that. But yeah, I think it's just a process to go through. So my experience of all of this was about 10 years ago, and it does still nip at me sometimes from a guilt perspective. But like my relationship's moved on, and we've definitely grown from it. And I think in relation to any sort of real event, harm or ROCD type thing, where there's a mixture of it being ROCD, I think probably what you're struggling with is it really your ROCD? And so making peace with, even if it wasn't ROCD, even if you just are a person who cheats on people, like breaking down why that would be so terrible. It's not something that we want to have as a trait, but it doesn't write you off as a person. And so I think perfectionism plays a huge role in this as well. I will do, if you want to comment again, SC, like I will do a full video on ROCD if you like, about my experience with this stuff, if it's helpful. Last two, Luca says, a question about my fatigue. Thanks to my exhaustion, I feel less in touch with the world. My hobbies are less fun. My memory feels muted. Wow, that's such a good explanation. Muted. When the fatigue lifts, it comes back. I want to feel like that more. Again, sometimes it feels like it won't happen. Do I have to get comfortable with my fatigue and accept my life isn't always amazing? I obviously want to keep that happiness extended, but it's hard. Like, I'm smiling so much here, Luke, because you answered your own question, and we were talking in comments about that. You literally answered your own question here. Yes, why do we need to be happy all the time? And actually, a lot of people talk about happiness as something that, how would you experience happiness if you didn't experience the opposite? How would you even know you were happy? And that was a good thing if you were in a constant state of happiness. It's not realistic. So, yeah, like make peace with living life in fatigue. This helped me so much when it came to sleep and OCD. I used to panic about not getting enough sleep and then my symptoms would be worse. And so then it was like, okay, well, I'm making peace that if I don't sleep, I'm going to be really tired. And actually, having two young kids, I probably haven't slept very much in the last 5 years. I've only slept really in the last 6 months, and nothing bad happened. I just felt a bit tired. And also, memory being muted. Okay, there we go. Making peace with being forgetful. Maybe you screw up at work because you forgot something, and why is that so terrifying? So I love, Luca, that you have answered your own question here. So thanks for adding that in. I wanted to read it out because I love how much you just literally answered your own question. Smitha, please tell me if I'm saying that wrong. Smitha, we've talked on here before, so nice to hear from you again. This is our last question. So Smitha says, I have done ERP, exposure response prevention, which is exposures, and CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, with a therapist. I'm so much better now. I'm in touch with a therapist and I'm so much better now. Married and with 2 kids, but harm OCD has taken my life. I've come a long way, but I'm still having some fear, wondering what I should do next. I don't know or understand REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy. I've been talking for so long. So I need help in getting me started with the disputing beliefs. What should I start with? Okay, it says here that you're confined financially as well, as many people are. Okay, so yeah, similar to me, you've done exposures and CBT and you're so much better. That's amazing. Like, it's such a great start. And like, if you're having success with that therapist, keep going, if it all makes sense. And you can obviously, like, when I started working with Rob at OCD Recovery, I was still working with my CBT therapist as well. So there's nothing to say that you have to like stop what you're doing if you're with a really great therapist. Married with 2 kids, so we're the same there. And you've been suffering with harm OCD, which is really similar to me. And yeah, if you're still struggling, I imagine it's that you're still scared of the fears being true. So I would say, in order to get started, if you haven't already, read the reading list on ocdrecovery.com/ I think it's resources. Read the reading list and start to learn more about rational emotive behavior therapy. So book 1, How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything, Yes, Anything, by Albert Ellis. That's a really good introduction to REBT and how irrational beliefs fuel so much of our distress and discomfort in life. So I would suggest starting there. And I know that you've watched a few of my videos, but watching a few more of them, like the ones on specifically unconditional self and life acceptance. There are also pages on the ocdrecovery.com website on the concept of unconditional self and life acceptance and irrational beliefs. And I know that there are like exercises, I'm sure, in this How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable. I'm sure there's exercises on conducting your own disputing of irrational beliefs. What you could do if finances are a problem is you could join one of the webinars. So keep an eye out on the OCD Recovery Instagram page. If you're not already following, they regularly announce dates for webinars, and I know they do harm OCD ones quite regularly, so you could do that. If you haven't already, maybe join the Facebook group as well, where you can chat to other people who have harm OCD and children, and they can talk to you as well. So there's loads of things that you can do for free and at very low cost. I think the webinars, I don't know how much they are anymore, to be honest, but they're not expensive in comparison with having like one-to-one sessions. So it's always worth getting in contact with OCD Recovery just to find out, because I know that they are conscious of people's financial situations. Like, I don't work there, so I can't say, but it's worth getting in contact sometimes. And yeah, just it's good to just start to learn for yourself about how all these things work, so that you can, even if you had 1 or 2 sessions at some point, to get a recovery plan so that you've got some direction. And the webinars are always really great for just asking questions. You can get so much from them as well. That is the last of our questions. I don't think I've talked that much without breathing for so long. I hope that was useful. If you have a question for me, please comment below and I will answer it in my next Q&A. And in the meantime, like, I hope you're doing okay, doing well. I hope this was valuable to you. If there's any topics you'd like me to cover, like if you don't have a question but you would like me to cover a topic, just let me know below. Please like the video too, so we can get in front of more people to see these Q&As. And have a great rest of your day. Bye.